This is the all-new Adidas Boston 10. Gone is the boost in the midsole, and instead we've got lightstrike Pro, a half carbon fiber plate in the heel, and carbon fiber metatarsal rods in the forefoot. But with all these changes, can this shoe possibly still feel like a Boston? Or do we have something that's completely different? It's time to lace up these shoes and take them for a run. 10.51 miles, 8 minutes, 2 seconds per mile on average, and 153 beats per minute today, taking the brand new Boston 10 out for a first run. It was my first workout since my 50K race about a week and a half ago. So today I did have a bit of a workout, but kind of like getting back into the swing of things type of workout. I had a fartlek with a 2-mile warm up and then 10 by 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Some of those were, the first 5 were at threshold power. And then on the turnaround, I did the rest of the on portions at marathon power. And then of course I had a cool down to get back home. I felt like this would be a really great way to test out the all new Adidas Boston 10. Before I give my thoughts on this new shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I purchased myself. The story about that is a little bit unusual. Not something I've never done before, but something that doesn't happen all the time. I'll get to that more when I start talking about the specs of the shoe, but it is a shoe that I paid for myself. No one sent it to me. No one's paying me to make this video, and no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the brand new Adidas Boston 10. First, let's talk about some specs. I actually don't know a lot about the actual specs of the shoe, and that's because I bought this because I saw that someone on Instagram had purchased a pair, found an online retailer that probably was supposed to hold onto their inventory of the Boston 10 till the actual launch date. There's probably some sort of mistake somewhere, either intentional or likely inadvertent, and the shoe was available for sale. I picked one up when I heard about that and it got delivered to me. So that's how I have the Boston 10. But since then, their listing for the product is no longer there. So they don't have any information on it. None of my usual sources have any information on what the stack heights are going to be for this shoe, for example. And Adidas doesn't have any information yet on their website about the Boston 10. So I don't know about the stack height. I don't know about the drop. Typically, the Boston has been a 10 millimeter shoe, but I will also specify that the Adios Pro from last year was an 8.5 millimeter drop shoe, and it feels like it's probably one of those two. As far as weights go, I also don't know what the stated weight is, but I did measure my size 9, and size 9 is the reference size. So when you usually when you see like a size listed on a website, they're talking about a men's size 9. Mine came in at 10.3 ounces and 294 grams. Now, in terms of the other things that I do know about this shoe, let's talk about the midsole first, because that's where like the big story is. There's no more boost in this shoe at all. Boost is dead as far as the Boston is concerned. We've got lightstrike as the bottom layer of midsole foam, which is what we saw in the Boston last year, although last year that lightstrike was on the top layer. This year they moved it to the bottom layer because on top they've got Lightstrike Pro, which is the brand new super foam that Adidas introduced last year when they released the Adidas Adios Pro, which was my favorite carbon plated racer of 2020. And there's a generally thick amount of Lightstrike Pro, more in the forefoot, which is the area where you're going to really want it. Not quite as much in the heel, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well when I start talking about the ride characteristics of this shoe. Sandwiched in between those two layers, there is a half carbon fiber plate in the heel, just like in the Adios Pro. Although I don't know if it's the exact type of carbon that's in there, but the placement and the size, I believe, is pretty similar to what's in the Adios Pro. And in the forefoot, there are metatarsal rods that kind of line up underneath your bones. So that way, instead of having a plate, you've got a rod that's going to get compressed and decompress as you're going through the gait cycle. As far as the upper is concerned, we have a dual layer mesh. There is like a single layer mesh that is kind of a booty over the entire foot. So it's like a mega gusseted tongue. It's like more like a booty construction. And on top of that is this clear mesh layer on top of that layer. In between these two layers, there's this orange material that's in here on mine that is a bit of an overlay that also I think serves to provide a little bit more of a structural element. On the lateral side, there's actually kind of like a hole in it. So there's a little bit of breathability in there. On top, there's another layer of overlay. We've got like this kind of like orange and then white felt. It's almost like a tennis ball felt type of material right along the toe cap, and it comes along all the way over the ball of the foot. And then on top, right up at the vamp where the end of the laces are, there's another kind of like decorative element of this felt type material. The tongue has a little bit of padding way up at the top, but otherwise it's just this mesh material, stays out of the way, stayed in place for me really well, and I'm definitely enjoying this tongue. And then as you move further back, there is a light amount of padding back here. I like what they're doing. It's very, again, reminiscent of what we saw in the Adios Pro, but I'd say there's a little bit more padding here. There's also some kind of external pads as well, which I'm not really quite sure what we're supposed to do with that. And then there's this weird little like nub back here. I'm not sure why this isn't sewn down or what's really going on with this. It's not big enough to be like a pull tab. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. I just don't understand it. Back in the heel cup, you've got a pretty good amount of structure back here for a shoe that's meant to be run fast in. It is a little bit flexible, so you can move around a little bit in it, but overall, it's going to do a good job of keeping you locked into place. Moving to the outsole, we've got Continental rubber in a layout that's pretty similar again to what we saw on the Adios Pro, but it is a little bit different. There's a cutout here so you can actually see the metatarsal rods, which is pretty wild. It's to be able to see that. But this general layout is kind of like a hybrid between what the Adios Pro was and what last year's Boston was. So I feel like it's a nice kind of like iteration or combination or melding of those two types of outsoles. And the rubber that you do have out on here is pretty thick and grippy. Looks like it's going to help in making sure that this shoe lasts for a very long time. And like I said, it does come in at a weight of 10.3 ounces, but I'll tell you, it feels heavier than that. It feels like quite a heavy shoe. And with that, let's start talking about what it's like to run in this thing. So first, we'll start off with kind of threshold pace. That's where I find that this shoe is probably the most exciting. And for me, overall, I think that I'm going to be using this shoe most frequently as a long workout type of shoe. So if I'm doing like mile repeats or anything at threshold where I'm going to be at a higher level of work for a sustained period of time, that's where I think this shoe is going to be really fun to work with. When you start getting up at that threshold pace, you're getting a lot of that lightstrike foam and you're getting those metatarsal rods compressed. And so that way, when you compress them and start to take off from your next stride, they decompress and that pops you forward. I'll say that I'm not getting quite as strong of a push forward sensation from the Boston 10 as I am getting from the Adios Pro, but there's just so many similarities between that shoe and this one. It's analogous to what went on last year with Saucony when we first saw the Endorphin Pro and the Endorphin Speed. Two shoes that had very similar feels, but one which was just much more rigid and the other which felt like it could be used for a lot of workouts. It wasn't quite as rigid, but had a little bit more durability and livability built into it. And I think that's really what we're seeing here. I feel like there's the Adios Pro, and this is kind of like the Adios Speed almost. That's probably the best way that I can describe what I'm feeling with this shoe. I do love the feeling that I'm getting from the shoe quite a bit. It's exciting for me to run fast in it, but having experienced the Adios Pro, I keep thinking for this workout, the Adios Pro also would have been really fun to run in. So a lot of the experience that I'm feeling is this is a great running shoe. It could be better, and I've run in better from this brand before, but this just seems to be kind of like taken down a bit of a notch. And I think for a lot of people, that's going to be perfect. The Adios Pro might be too aggressive of a shoe for a lot of people. It might not be a shoe that people think that they would want to run a marathon in. I do think that the Boston 10 could really check all the boxes for a lot of runners that are out there, especially that segment of runner that wants to try something new, wants to try something that has a different kind of feel. Not sure if they want to go all the way to the Adios Pro or to the highest level of carbon plated super shoes that are out there. This is a really good option for a lot of people to do a lot of their marathon workouts in and even race their marathons in. And when it comes to running at marathon pace, I ran half of the on sessions for the fartlek for today at marathon effort, and I felt like the shoe did really well there. I will say I don't feel like I'm feeling quite as much of the metatarsal rods when I'm running at marathon effort. I feel like there it's a lot more of an interaction of that Lightstrike Pro foam and a little bit of the Lightstrike that's in there, but I'm still getting a nice snappy feel. I'm still feeling like this is a shoe that's has something more to it than just a traditional like midsole foam and that's all it's got type of shoe. So I feel like there is certainly a premium feeling to it in terms of the performance that it can deliver. And it feels like there's something just a little bit extra in that shoe at those marathon efforts. And frankly, I had a little bit of a hard time kind of staying at that marathon effort. A lot of times I felt like I was creeping up constantly back up to that threshold level, or in an effort to kind of stay away from there, I found myself kind of like cruising a little bit below that. So I think that's more user error. I got to spend a little bit more time at that marathon effort to really dial that in, but the shoe certainly is very capable of running for an extended period of time at that marathon effort. And I think that people looking for that marathon trainer slash racer, the Boston 10, I think is going to be a really great option. But that's not to say I absolutely love this shoe or that everyone should go out and get it. When I was at my warm-up paces or at my recovery paces, so there's 3 minutes of work and then 2 minutes of recovering, keeping moving, not really worrying about the pace, but just keeping the legs moving until the next on phase. That's where I felt like the shoe really felt very rough around the edges, almost kind of like when you drive a sports car and like in first gear, it feels very herky-jerky, similar to like the kind of feeling that I get in a lot of marathon super shoes. It just doesn't like being run at kind of your everyday pace, which is where I feel like there's the biggest departure from like the traditional Boston, like the Boston 9 and earlier, and the Boston 10. The Boston 9 and earlier, I do really feel like it excelled at that marathon workout type of shoe, and it was a shoe that a lot of people ran their marathons in. But it also, for a lot of people, depending on your running style, it was something they could run in almost every day as well because it worked at a variety of paces. I think a lot of that versatility is gone in this shoe at slower paces. Just a lot of the kind of things that are going on in this shoe really started to feel like they weren't like working well together. For example, the half carbon fiber plate that's in here makes this back part of the shoe a little bit back heavy and very, very firm. So I feel like I wasn't getting, like there's a lot of stack height back here, but I wasn't feel like I was getting a lot of squish, which is what I would want when I'm on those recovery paces or when I'm in that warm-up phase. The other thing to keep in mind is I feel like there's a little bit of an optical illusion going on here with the Lightstrike. I do think that you're standing on a lot of Lightstrike Pro in the forefoot in this shoe. But when you take the insole out of this shoe, you can kind of like feel around in here. You can see that like, or at least feel that a lot of this Lightstrike Pro that's in the band that goes all the way around the shoe is really more like a cup. So I'm not exactly sure how much Lightstrike Pro you're actually standing on in the back of the shoe. And from what it feels like, I don't think that there's very much at all. So like this heel area just feels very rigid, even just kind of like just squeezing the foam, comparing it to another Lightstrike shoe I've got in my rotation, the SL20. That one is just so much squishier. And I even feel like the SL20 version 2 is a little bit firmer than the SL20 version 1 and also the Lightstrike that was in the Boston 9 of last year. So I feel like the Lightstrike keeps getting firmer. And in the Boston 10, the Lightstrike, the regular Lightstrike, not the Lightstrike Pro, the regular Lightstrike is very firm. Maybe that's something that breaks in over time. I'll let you guys know as I get to some more miles in the shoe. But for now, for today's run, for the 10-mile run today, it just felt really firm back there the entire time. And in the forefoot, I felt like it really wasn't taking advantage of the Lightstrike Pro at those levels of effort. You're not really running fast enough for the Lightstrike Pro to feel squishy yet. It's like you're not putting enough into it, and so you're just landing on something that feels kind of firm as well. So it's firm in the back, it's firm in the front, and it just doesn't make for a very comfortable ride when you're running at that lower pace. So that's where I feel like this new Boston is very different than prior Bostons. Like the Boston Faithful, you should go stock up on Boston 9 stock that you can get now because the Boston 10 doesn't feel like the old Bostons anymore. But on the other hand, the new Boston 10 might become your race day shoe, even if you love the old Bostons. As far as the fit on the upper, the fit was fantastic. Exactly what you would expect from the Boston. And I would say that's probably the only thing about this that like kind of reminded me of the shoes that I've run in the previous years, is that the fit was really great, breathable, but yet felt like there was enough kind of like to it there that it would be durable for lots of training miles that you might put into it, as well as the rigors that you might put the shoe through if you're going to actually be racing in it as well. And moving to the grip on the outsole, the Continental grip was fantastic. I'd say it's an improvement even over what we saw in the Boston 9 last year, and as well an improvement to what we saw in the Adios Pro. The one area that I had a little bit of problem with the Adios Pro, and it's something that I had a problem with basically all the Marathon Super shoes from last year, was a little bit of sand being on the pavement. Now I run along the lakefront and there's a sandy shore, and when it gets windy, some of that sand blows onto the pavement. With the Adios Pro last year, I had a pretty hard time running not only on that sand, but then the sand would kind of get stuck to the bottom of the shoe. And so even when I was past the sand, I would still feel like I wasn't getting a good kind of like grip to toe off for the next stride. Didn't have that problem at all with the Boston 10, so the traction is definitely improved. And it's that Continental rubber, so it's gonna last a really, really long time as well. So overall, the weight seems to be a lot heavier this year for the Boston 10, but I do feel like it is an improvement. I still feel like the Boston 10 is a more capable marathon workout and possible marathon racing shoe. Is it a better Boston? I'm not so sure about that, but is it a better shoe at kind of that use case? I think it is. In terms of the things that I like, I definitely enjoy what's going on in the Boston 10. I'll be putting more miles into this shoe as I do some more workouts. I've got a lot of different types of races coming up for the rest of this year, which means also a lot of different types of workouts. So feel free to subscribe if you want to be able to follow along with that. And if you have any questions right now in the meantime, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube. You can always ask me anything you like there. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?